branch meeting. For those of you who have not met me at one of our pre-COVID branch events when we could have all met together, my name is Shazara Alibukas Ramlogan, and I'm currently the branch treasurer. So I'll be taking you all through this evening's meeting. Today, our topic is actually severe weather planning, which I'm sure most of you will agree it's a very pertinent topic. For those of you who are joining from Trinidad today, we've had a lot of rain all day today and some severe flooding in some areas. Before we get into the presentation, as I mentioned before, we want to make this a very interactive session. We want to give people the chance to participate. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please utilize the chat function during the session. Our communications coordinator, Rishi, will collate those questions to feed to our speakers at the end of the meeting. And at the end of the meeting as well, we'll also have some time there where you can actually, ask the questions one-on-one if you want and get any further clarification on any of the information that was shared during the meeting. Okay, so today we actually have two speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Paula Wellington, and we're very fortunate to have someone from the Met Office. So she's a meteorologist too at the Met Office. And then we also have Stefan Afonso, who is a disaster management coordinator, and he'll be presenting on the severe weather planning process and the whole response actions to be taken, and as well as some business continuity. We also have with us today our branch coordinator, Catherine Daly, who is on the other side of the globe, and we're really thankful to have you at this hour because it's quite late where you are. So without further ado, we're going to have Ms. Paula Wellington with her slides on, sorry, Paula, if you can go ahead and share your slides.
Sure, no problem. Good afternoon, everyone.
So Paula Wellington, as I mentioned, is a meteorologist to the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service. So she will be giving us some information on the early warning weather system, just helping us understand what those warnings mean. Because as HSC practitioners, when we guide our management with respect to emergency planning and severe weather, we need to also understand what those warnings actually mean, and how we should actually advise them to respond during those severe weather events or prior to those events.
Okay, good afternoon. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I can go ahead. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the Met Office website firstly, and then we will get into a short discourse on the rainy season and hurricane season 2021. All right. So this is the Met Office website, an introduction. It's metoffice.gov.tt. And you can access most, if not all, of our information via this route. All right. My apologies for the big under maintenance sign, but for reasons we are unable to have the reader up and running. But what is important really is where to find our warnings, our public warnings. You can see on the tab warnings circled in red, where you can find most of our warning information or alerts. We you can also get your warnings on the banner also. So whatever warnings we have or alerts we have, you can find it at two locations on the website, on the warnings tab and also on the banner. This example is showing a riverine flood alert discontinuation, a green level, and also there is a blog on the declaration of the start of the rainy season. So those are the areas that you can find our alerts. This is an example of the adverse weather alert. So there are the details on the start time, details on the end time. Also, we have warnings that may straddle 2 days, sometimes 3 days, or we may have warnings or alerts that may start in the future. So those start dates and times are noted on the alert itself. The other information that you can see as soon as the warning is, well, pops up on the screen, you will see the alert type. We have several alert types. This example is adverse weather alert. We had an adverse weather alert yesterday. I'm not sure if some of you all were aware of one. Today we had a riverine flooding alert in Trinidad. So it is actually ongoing right now. So if you go to the website and you click on the warnings or the ticker tape, not the ticker tape, the banner, you'll be able to view the warnings. That is there, the riverine warning that we have up today. Another warning or alert that we do have is tropical cyclone and also hazardous seas. We can also see response, what type of response that the public should take, the urgency, the severity, and the likelihood of the information or the alert or the impacts that are being addressed. Okay. So to make our decision as to the type of alert, whether it's a green level, a yellow level, an orange level, or red level, we use this risk assessment matrix. The risk assessment matrix brings into play the severity of the impacts as well as the certainty of the hazard that we are speaking about. So the severity of the impacts move from minor to moderate to severe to extreme. And if the color will change depending on whether the hazard is possible, likely, or observed. So the extreme, if something is unlikely, a hazard is unlikely, but there's extreme impacts. Like take, for instance, today's flooding event. It may have been, let's say, unlikely yesterday, but we can see that the impacts were a bit extreme. So that would require yellow level alert, which may have been what was the reasoning behind today's alert. Okay, moving on, we have certainty. That is to talk about the certainty of the hazard, if it's unlikely to occur, if it is possible, if it's very likely, or if it's actually observed. And even if it's minor, you realize if the impacts are not minor, it stays at a green level. So impacts, depending on the severity of the impacts, will require a different color addressing those particular hazards. This is the common alerting protocol, or the CAP, we call them CAPs, which we use to identify our warnings. And you can see that depending on the risk level, the description is different and the action required is different. So green level, low risk to public safety, livelihood, and property poses risk as poses, and we use this most times for cancellation. Action required, obviously, for persons to remain cautious, to monitor their surroundings, to pay attention to other warnings that may still be in effect, and to stock up on emergency supplies. The second level yellow level, moderate risk to public safety, livelihood, and property. This can be some disruption in a few places. Take, for instance, the flooding today would have caused disruptions in traffic, or some persons may have had difficulties getting in and out of their homes. So normal activity is disrupted and impacted. So therefore, the action required would be to monitor conditions and keep abreast of the official updates. The next higher level would be the orange, or the high risk. Hazardous conditions would have existed, where lives would be threatened, livelihood would be threatened, property would be threatened as well, and those hazards would cause serious injuries or casualties. So therefore, this is the action required by members of the public would be to prepare or take preparations to prepare, or probably evacuate, take necessary steps to plan an evacuation. And the highest level that we have is red, very high or extreme risk to public safety, livelihood, and property. And this would be dangerous conditions would be existing where serious injury, loss of life, loss of property can be expected. And therefore, the action required would be of high importance, and of finding safe shelter, of evacuation, actual evacuations, and other steps to maintain or to save life and property. Okay, so I am now jumping into, okay, before I move on, I just spoke about the website, but I want to introduce at this juncture, introduce the app. I'm not sure if you all know about the Met Office app, TT Met Office. I will share the link at the end, but all of the information that you can get on the Met Office website, you can also access on the Met Office app. The nice thing about the Met Office app is that when there is an alert posted, you can get, or you will get, a notification on your phone, on your mobile device, that would alert you to that an existing or an alert that has been issued. So moving on to the 2021 rainy season and hurricane season outlook for Trinidad and Tobago. This was given or done by the climate section of the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service by our climatologist, Mr. Kenneth Kerr. And I would direct you at the end to a YouTube video that you can, in your spare time, probably follow up. The presentation was made by him at our National Climate Outlook Forum this year in May 2021. So the dry season usually runs from January to May, with May being a transition month. This is separate from the rainy season, which runs climatologically from June to December, with December being a transition month. The hurricane season is within the rainy season, which is from the months of June to November. So the wet season outlook for 2021, we expect to have warmer than normal temperatures in Trinidad and Tobago, drier than normal start to the rainy season. Oh, well, let me go back. Probability for warmer temperatures would have the probability will be between 40 to 60%, with cities and urban areas having the highest chance of warmer than usual temperatures. We also expect a drier than normal start to the rainy season, with 50 to 70% chance of week 3 being dry. And with 50 to 70% chance of week 3 producing less than 7 millimeters of rainfall going back. June is likely to be, well, after double check, I did not double check that data, that June was likely the driest in the 3 months. However, we expect the second half of the rainy season to be, with October and November likely to be the wettest months. And we expect Pitikaram to be possible in September. Therefore, overall, the wet season, we are looking at above normal rainfall, more likely for this 2021 wet season. Hurricane season. So we have the North Atlantic Hurricane Basin. And to give some perspective, this is Trinidad and Tobago, our location. Now, this area in white would be our area of interest. We don't consider, well, not consider, we consider the whole Atlantic, but once there is any activity between this white rectangle, white box, it's in our area of interest. So for the long-term average of the total Atlantic season, we have a long-term average of 14 tropical storms, with 7 becoming hurricanes and 3 becoming major hurricanes, which is greater than category 3. In 2020, the statistics were that there were 13 named storms, 13 of them becoming hurricanes, and there were 6 major hurricanes, which were greater than category 3. Now, this is the 2021 Atlantic outlook. This is presented by the Colorado State University, CSU, with a range of 13 to 20 tropical storms. This is the entire Atlantic basin, mind you, 13 to 20 named storms with an average of 17, 6 to 10 becoming hurricanes with an average of 8 becoming hurricanes, and we expect in the entire Atlantic basin 3 to 5 major hurricanes. In our area of interest, Trinidad and Tobago Met Office, the Climate Department has come up with our outlook, and we expect 5 most likely named storms, 5 or an average of 4, 3 to 6, a range of 3 to 6, which is average of 5. More likely number of hurricanes that may affect Trinidad directly or the area of interest, 1, and the likely range of hurricanes which may be in our area, 1 to 2. So we may have 87% roughly of near normal or above normal hurricane season. So the main message I want to leave you all with: the region faces a very active hurricane season, especially in the area of interest for 2021. And we have had the interaction with Elsa earlier this month. So we have the idea of, there can be tropical storms in our area, as well as the persistence of tropical waves that are traversing our area at this point in time. Therefore, we're also looking at an above average or above normal hurricane activity in this forecast area, with 5 named storms possible in our area of interest, and 1 of them may become a hurricane. So at this point in time, it is too early to know which of these hurricanes or storms will affect our islands. But we know that if those storms do form in our area of interest, they can threaten the Eastern Caribbean islands, Trinidad, including Trinidad and Tobago and Grenada. And we know it only takes one storm that can cause devastation to any of these islands. So we should be have that culture. We should have that culture of hurricane preparation in mind. So moving on, this should be the end. I want to draw your attention to YouTube link. Look for Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service. You can actually listen to Mr. Kenneth Kerr present his outlook for the wet season and hurricane season, which was done at NCOF this year in May. And you can also find details on the CAP, which was launched together with the app about 3 years ago. The app can be accessed via the Google Play Store or your Apple Store, sorry. Look for the handle TT Met Office for both your Apple Store and your Google Play Store. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Really appreciate you taking the time out to share information on the early warning system and of course giving us some insight on what's likely to come up during this hurricane season. And as I mentioned, the early warning system, we see it all the time, but as HSC practitioners, it's really important for us to understand all of the parts of those warnings and what they mean, how we should respond, because as practitioners, we have to advise our team or management on when to take those warnings seriously and how we should prepare, of course, to safeguard life and of course property as well, and the actual runnings of the business, the actual operations of the business. Okay, so I will now go on to introduce our second speaker, who will really go into the severe weather planning aspect and how you really put proper response actions in place. So our second speaker is Mr. Stefan Afonso. Stefan is a Fulbright scholar who is the holder of a Master's of Science in Security and Resilience Studies, specializing in counterterrorism and pre-disaster recovery. He is currently spearheading the city's resilience strategies, preparedness and responses as a disaster management coordinator to the Port of Spain City Corporation. So Stefan, if I can ask you now to, you can bring up your slides, if you can.
Hi, Shazara. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I'm pulling it up now. Is everyone seeing?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I thank you very much, Shazara. Paula, thank you for the segue. Thank you for the introduction. You laid a fantastic foundation. So I'm supposed to be doing this presentation with one of my colleagues, another disaster management coordinator from Point Fortin, Hazen Cummings, but unfortunately she was unable to make the meeting, so she asked me to do her part as well. So I'm gonna try to do her justice. I'm gonna definitely try my best. So this is just a quick outline of the presentation. We're gonna do an overview, provide a context for general disaster management SOPs, move into the time phase schedule, which is how we would treat with if it is that we have anticipated severe weather events. So I just want to say that this type of planning is really for events that could be anticipated. It's very difficult to plan for events that can't be anticipated, but and that's with reference to like earthquakes. We can't predict when they're going to happen, but it doesn't mean that we can't plan. And I could speak to that a little bit to the end of it, but the focus of this, or the context of this, is really just in terms of preparation for hurricanes or tropical storms or bad weather events. I'm going to kind of link it to business continuity, any business continuity model advanced by the BCI, which is a body of knowledge that I'm familiar with. And then see how I could make some suggestions and recommendations to you all as IOSH advisors and practitioners, and see how you could link that to your business continuity to try to bring everything together. And I always think that it's nice to summarize at the end and give you maybe 3 or 4 key takeaways. So that's why I suggested 3 key takeaways at the end. So in terms of our standard operating procedures, this is in the context of our daily operations. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to give the context that what we do during our daily operations links very closely to how we will be able to prepare and respond to large-scale events or impacts or natural hazard events that will have a larger impact. So what I'm basically trying to show is that basically is what we will end up doing in that time phase response or preparation are things that we actually do in our daily and routine functions. And it's linked, everything that we do is linked to our disaster management cycle, which is preparedness, mitigation, response and recovery. And that is really to help structure our operations. So planning for natural hazard impacts requires preparation and training, which takes place weeks, months, years ahead. Recognizing that fantastic input from Met Office. But there is a possibility, and there's a possibility that we may not be impacted or severely impacted by any storms. But there's also the flip side where we could be possibly severely impacted by one or multiple storms or multiple severe weather impacts. So the impact, so the preparation that you do now you may not accrue the benefits, or you may not see the benefits of it within this season. But it doesn't mean that the benefits won't be there. You have to treat it as though it's an investment, that you're investing in building capacity, in making sure that you have the plans, providing that strategic, tactical, operational framework and support, so that when something does happen, you already have the mechanisms and the policies and practices in place. So as I mentioned, this presentation is really to examine or to share with you how the DMUs engage in severe weather planning, and to offer insight to how, as HSC advisors, you can advise your employers on how to plan better for severe weather impacts. So this is generally, in terms of the slide, our standard SOPs, whenever it is. So I'm glad that Paula mentioned the severe weather alert that came out yesterday. That's something that we frequently do. Most DMUs and DMU staff have the app. We are in tune with our connections at ODPM and Met Office. So as soon as something comes out, we're frequently monitoring Facebook and their Facebook pages, so that when updates come out, we have our responsibility to share it with our seniors. In this case, we have a political and administrative arm. So all corporations are structured in that way, where there's a political arm and an administrative arm. And I know I'm going into what may seem to be somewhat irrelevant, but it's very important to understand when it is that we're dealing with this type of operation. And it will relate to your organization as well. It's very important to inform and keep them informed, keep your seniors informed, keep your management informed. Keep your executive informed. It may not be your direct responsibility, but it's your responsibility to inform, to pass along the information, because you don't want something to happen and then you end up in a position of why didn't you share the information? It's always better to share the information, and that's our practice. So we inform our CEOs, we inform our councillors. So the head of the political arm is usually a mayor or a chairman, and the head of the administrative arm is the CEO, and we all have to work together. So we share the information so that if the mayor is called and asked questions by media houses, which often happens for Port of Spain, the mayor is already updated and he's kept abreast of everything as it's developing. Oftentimes, he may end up calling me, Stefan, what's going on? So even within our daily practices, or daily, or you could say weekly operations, there's that constant communication across upwards. There's that constant communication upwards, so that I report to the executive. And there's also the communication downwards, because I need to inform supervisors if it is that they themselves need to mobilize equipment, and what type of equipment may be required, and if it is that we need labor or personnel things along those lines. So this is just a general guideline in terms of how we deal with an event on our day-to-day basis. Level 1 is usually, so there are 3 levels. This is level 1. Moving on to level 2 now. Level 2, level 1, level 2, and level 3. It's very simple. Level 1 is really restricted to a municipal corporation and the capacity and resources of a corporation to be able to respond to an incident. So for instance, yesterday generally was a level 1. Even though multiple corporations were impacted, we were all able to respond on our own. There was no need for cross-coordination. Level 2 is where you see cross-coordination coming to the fore. That being that DMUs will correspond with each other. We generally know what each other needs, but there's a formality of making sure that CEOs are aware, because CEOs are the accounting officers, the chief accounting officers, chief financial officers, chief operating officers. So we ensure that we make sure and get the approvals across DMUs, across corporations, before it is we actually mobilize. But in the background, we already begin to mobilize, knowing by discussing, by understanding, by communicating. So I want to really stress the importance of that communication component, communication within the organization and communication with external parties. So the second part is where we will issue level 2 again. So it's a larger scale event. We will issue a call out to our CERT volunteers, community emergency response trained volunteers, which will be people who have been trained and certified based on a program that is run by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. These individuals would be trained in search and rescue, basic first aid and CPR, and other components, counterterrorism, psychological first aid. So it's about 8 modules that the CERT training comprises or covers, but it basically equips regular individuals with the basics to be able to respond. And that is very relevant, I think, to HSE advisors and HSE practitioners, because, and this is a plug for that training as well, it's free. You don't have to pay for it, so you don't have to source it. If it is that you want us to do the training for you so that you can help build your organizational resilience by having trained staff, then that's an asset that can work for you. It works in your favor. So coming back to the presentation, this is just really about section 2, level 2, and then we move on to level 3. If I'm speaking too quickly, please let me know. I will slow down. So level 3 is where we have a nationwide type event that could and cannot be predicted. And the reason I say that is because if we look at the past, we look at issues like 2018, 2019, 2012, 2015, which were large scale, widespread flooding events that could not have necessarily been anticipated. So we may have anticipated the rain, but the impact of the rain was not as widely anticipated or projected. And those were events that impacted areas like Sangre Grande, Mero, Rio Claro. And these are all areas that were impacted at the same time, which would have put the corporation responsible under strain. In that case, you would have found that the corporation under strain would have set up an incident command post. So all corporations are under all DMUs, disaster management units, are trained in Emergency Operation Command, so EOC, and ICS 100 and 200. ICS being Incident Command System. And it means that we're all capable to set up those incident command systems or incident command posts so that we can cross-coordinate resources from our emergency support functions, which then extends beyond the corporation and includes entities like police, public utilities, TSTT, B-Mobile, WASA, TNTech, fire services, and we pull everyone together, we pull representatives of everyone together into this meeting so that we can faster respond and mobilize resources. In some instances, for some corporations that are not as heavily impacted. So for instance, 2019, when there was a heavy flooding impact, and particularly in South Penal Devi, Sawa Lavantil was also impacted, Tunapuna Piako and Sangre Grande. The corporations that were not heavily impacted provided support in terms of equipment, labor, and in doing simple things like DANAs, damage and needs assessment. So this is generally to provide a context in terms of the disaster management unit standard operating procedures, how we deal with our routine type events. So I'm now moving into the time phase schedule, which is where we now transition into preparation and planning for an anticipated event. 5 days out, 6 days out, we see that there's a storm brewing in the Atlantic coming off the coast of Africa. What are we going to do? What generally takes place? So before we move into what takes place, I just want to stress that this is a step-by-step process that triggers actions by decision makers in preparation for and response to, if required, an emergency or disaster event. So we're basically saying that if something is brewing 6 days away, we still need to put things in place to make sure that we have the capacity and the resources to respond. We have to test and continuously test our systems, our policies, our procedures, our practices, so that we are always basically on the ball. This is a tool also that helps decision makers review and analyze and implement actions, because it provides a timetable for completing actions. So it's not just a matter of saying we have something 6 days away, what do we do? And there's no template, there's no checklist. It's ticks in a box. It's more than just ticks in a box. It's making sure it's actually putting words into action. So this is generally a phase summary of time-phased response. There are two slides in this regard. There's phase summary A to E, which brings us from awareness to mobilization of resources pre-event. And then I'm just going to jump forward, but I'll come back to this slide. Phase F, which is the storm event, to redevelopment, which is post-event. There'll be some mention of or some context in terms of what I would speak to in terms of post-event, but it's not really the focus. So phase A, and you'd see it listed here, this is generally how we plan, and you'd kind of see it being in somewhat 24-hour increments, 100 hours being roughly 4 days out, 4 to 5 days out. Now these hours are very fluid, 100 hours, 75 hours, 50 hours. So we're breaking it down day by day and these meetings could be more frequent if it is that there's need for it to be more frequent. But it's just basically stating that at every day, there's a change in position, and change in position determines how we're going to mobilize resources and assets. So the notification period being awareness is appropriating agencies, giving them the awareness that, hey, this is going to happen or this may happen. Let's start putting things in place. We then move into the standby phase, which is the alert period, giving people a greater attention. 3 days away from an event. What are the possible vital services or essential services that are going to be impacted? Moving into the phase C, or the decision making, understanding that how are we going, or what do we need to do as immediate actions? Do we need to evacuate persons? Of course, this is constantly providing information to the public. That is a given. So I just want to state that as well. At every stage in time, the relevant entities will be providing updates to the public. That doesn't fall within the DMU's jurisdiction, but it doesn't mean that the DMU doesn't provide updates, again, to the political arm, to the executive arm, so the administrative arm, so that if there's need for a briefing, if there's need for a public meeting or a press conference, they already have the information as we have it. And then we move into the preparation, which is where you go back into, you basically do a revision, a reanalysis of your preparation and what is needed, so that when it comes to the actual evacuation, things are already in place leading up to the event. Now that 24-hour period could be somewhat unpredictable because things could change rapidly with the climate, things could change rapidly with the direction of a storm. But even in that instance, you still need to be prepared. So even though we time it as 24 hours, it's likely that we could have less than 24 hours, and 18 hours is really what we're working with. So it's just to say that you have to be very fluid in this situation and in treating with severe weather impacts, predictable severe weather impacts. So as I had mentioned here, phase F through G, it's not really the focus, but there are some notes in this slide. Generally, I just want to speak to here. During the storm event, it is highly advisable that unless you are a critical emergency support function, that being the Army or fire services or the police, you buckle down and stay safe. It is always better and best, it is our practice, to shelter in place until the storm passes, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where you become a victim. That is not going to help anyone. So it's tough, it's very difficult seeing people in need, seeing people who are vulnerable during the middle of a storm, during 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot flood waters, and you're thinking, well, maybe I know how to swim. I'm a strong swimmer. I could go out and help them. I could go out, swim a little bit and throw a rope. You become a victim. It is not advisable. Please. So we're now going into the TPS, the time phase schedule, phase A activities. This is phase A for our key activities. And this is generally how we would treat, again, linking it back to the time frame of A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E. And this would be our, as I had mentioned, what the activities, the core activities of what we would be doing. So this basically presents a bit of a template of how the DMUs treat with an event or severe weather impact that is predictable. Tropical storm or hurricane, that's 4 days out. This is what we would start to do. And under the bottom, the last point here, projection, activation of unified command and unified command, first meeting with CEO and ESF. So you see here that we have the first meeting with the CEO and the ESFs being emergency support functions, is where we would be anticipating our actions, whether it's a tropical storm, a tropical hurricane, and if it is a hurricane or a tropical storm, what category? Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, Category 4, and at what point in time would we project? So we're continuing to plan and project and prepare for our activities and how we're going to coordinate our activities. So this is phase A continued. This is just a list of different types of activities that we have to conduct pre an event. And you would realize that there's a key indicating who should be informed, and the level of priority, in addition to our responsibility being who's the responder and the date and time. So that way we have an idea when it is that you have an incident commander coming in or you have to provide a brief, you basically provide this document and you can give a real-time or live update as close as possible to whatever was discussed at the last meeting. And I'm gonna move pretty quickly through this because I think that a lot of this is it's very useful, but I understand that you can also go through this tweaking it to how it's best suited for your organization, because not all organizations are going to have the same structure. And likewise, not all organizations are going to have the same resources available and the same access to personnel or resources or mechanisms. So we're breaking it down now from 4 days out, we're now into 3 days out. You can see that the constant review and the updates, the process, it's pretty standard throughout, where we continue to anticipate projections, we continue to prepare, we continue to assign responsibilities. And if you look at point 4, as I mentioned before, during our standard operating procedures, we already have a good relationship, or we already have an established relationship with heads of section. So in this context, it's no different. In many cases, there are people who, before I even get a chance to call them, they will call me and say, hey, Stefan, so we already have these vehicles pre-positioned. And in case anything happens, we already have personnel available. We already packed out 400, 500, 600 sandbags. So we know that if anything happens, we already have things in place. This comes after practice, after building relationships with people, after doing things so many times that when people see bad weather, when people know the season, that we're moving into hurricane season, they already start to mobilize without the DMU even having to suggest it. So that when the DMU does follow up on it, it's a matter of just ticking off a box because it was already done. So much so that even when there are discussions take place even before the hurricane season. So at the beginning of the dry season, from as early as December, January, DMUs already start engaging other corporations or other heads of section to start preparing so that we can understand, we can anticipate, hey, what do you need? What services, what equipment do you need service? Do you need chainsaws to help, or do chainsaws need to be serviced so that we could help cut trees and mitigate fallen trees? Because that was an incident that took place about 2 weeks ago. A tree fell on Pembroke Street, and there was no way that we could have predicted it. So moving along into we continue in phase B, key activities. We continue to meet with our CEO, as I mentioned before, continuously briefing the CEO. The frequency of the briefs will take place, could take place more frequently based on how things develop and the updates that are provided by Met Office and the other official sources. Generally, the means for this update is either a phone call or a WhatsApp message, or followed up by a WhatsApp message, because sometimes the CEO, even though there's a phone call, she has so many things going on that it's always good to follow up in writing so that she can have a paper trail to follow. And that when she has the time to, even though it may be a few minutes later, she has the time to actually read the message and get a comprehensive update and provide it as well to heads of section. Because even though DMUs and DMCs respond directly to the CEO, we also have a responsibility to share the information to other heads of section, to other coordinators. So we're now moving into from 4 days to 3 days to now 2 days. And you'd see here a pretty consistent treatment or pretty consistent actions in terms of moving forward. But here you would see more deliberate actions. So before, what you would have seen as general actions in terms of our preparation, but now we're getting into more deliberate actions in terms of activating our EOC, engaging in a call out for CERT volunteers, engaging in a call out for shelter managers, because if it is that we need to open shelters, then shelters should ideally be opened before the event. Because remember, during the event, nobody should really be moving about unless you're a critical ESF. So preparation before really has a lot of moving parts and logistics until the event. And the EOC activation will mean that the DMC, the Disaster Management Coordinator, now becomes the incident commander, coordinating everything to make sure that everything is in place so that when the event occurs, and again, this is when Trinidad is within the probability cone, that we would be able to respond and manage the event quickly. So moving into phase C, right? Moving into phase, right? You'd see that we set up our ESFs. We call them our ESFs. Our ESFs would be various representatives from a bunch of agencies, across agencies. The number of ESFs you call out may not be everyone in this initial stage, because you may not need everyone at this initial stage. So it may just be a core body of ESFs or core group of ESFs. Regiment, police, public utilities being WASA and TNTech, your DMUs, your CERT. Generally, you'd have a few CERT volunteers in your ESF because you'd need support with administration. And you coordinating resources. So as I mentioned that before, you'd already be mobilizing and relocating and pre-positioning some of your assets. You would fill up things like your sandbags. We already have assets and goods, tarpaulins and mattresses pre-positioned, and that's a very important thing. Making sure that things are pre-positioned once it is that you have the resources to do that. So that if it is that, even though Port of Spain is a generally small area, Port of Spain stretches from Sealots to just before peaks there in Chaguaramas area, Caranage area, and then goes up to St. James, and it's bound by Maraval Road by that. So Flagstaff, Kent House, come down, and the Savannah, everything north of the Savannah is Diego Martin or Sawalav until Diego Martin, and St. Anne's is as well. So I'm just saying that it's a small jurisdiction, but if something were to happen, then for us to move from where we're located in Quarry Street, which is East Port of Spain, to St. James could be very difficult if there's flooding. It could be difficult if there's road blockage. And the delay in time is very important when it is looking at response and recovery. So moving along phase C, we do provide, or we do, I like this part, phase 2, where we're requesting construction companies to remove porta-johns from job sites, because we need to understand that we all have a part to play, and that if there's loose debris, if there are loose items that could become potentially hazardous, then we ourselves have the corporation has a responsibility to advise these individuals or these companies to take precautionary measures to secure their goods so that these things don't become potential hazards or mobile hazards. So just coming back here, this part for 13.13, it really falls under our building inspector department. So I really want to emphasize that cross coordination and collaboration across units within the corporation and even across corporations. So we're now moving into the last stages of preparation. We're now about 24 hours, give or take, before an event, and we are within the cone of probability. There's a likelihood of getting impacted or being impacted. Everything has been put in place. CERTs have been called out. Shelter managers have been called out. Shelters have been opened if and where possible. Of course, shelters being opened means that we do adhere to COVID-19 guidelines and protocols, making sure that we can physical distance, ensuring that, or at least advocating that people wear their masks, and there are mechanisms for people to be tested, and sanitizing as well. So we understand that when we're requesting council or ODPM to declare a local state of emergency, it has to be put into context, and there are triggers for this type of declaration, where there's a need for emergency protective measures or the activation of the EOC, use of alternative emergency support facilities, the movement of people. To declare local state of emergency requires as well emergency purchases, because corporations and resources may not always be available. So generally, disaster management units ensure that we have the resources to mobilize approximately 5 shelters. But if we're looking at a large scale severe weather impact and we have to open more shelters, then it means that we will need more things like cots, sanitizers. We'd also need to prepare things like meals, or at least source meals, pre the event. Some disaster management units have meals ready to eat, but not all do. So it's just to say that we're all aware of what needs to be done, but the availability of resources limits our ability to be fully prepared as we should be. which is something that I imagine many of you as HSE practitioners can face, because if I could just reference our HSE office or our HSE unit at the Port of Spain Corporation, they actually don't have a budget, which is a significant fallback or drawback, because when it comes to them having to do things and implement OSH policies or adhere to OSH policies and regulations, they have to depend on the availability of funds on other votes and see how their plans could be integrated into the plans of other votes and other departments, which could often be challenging, but it's not impossible. It just requires a lot of massaging and making things move forward. So continuing here, we're now in preparation again, liaison to make notifications of declaration of state of local emergency. Here we'd be liaising with ODPM and elected officials. And we also have to consider that, as I mentioned before, you may not require a full activation of your ESC, but you could consider a partial activation based on the resources available and based on the level of impact that you have assessed and you think may be experienced within your jurisdiction, like company or organization in this case. This is pretty standard, as I mentioned before, in terms of our preparation. We activate, as I mentioned, catering services. We need to provide meals for emergency shelters. We coordinate special needs. And we will close all parks and beaches. And the reason for that is really because we don't want people out and about. You know, Trinis like to party. I imagine that there may be people who are not from Trinidad in the session, but Trinis like to party and they will find every opportunity to party. So 24 hours before an event, they'll have a hurricane pre-party. We don't want that. We need to make sure that everybody is safe, at least in a safe shelter or safe facility, and not out in the open and exposed to debris flying around the place or being impacted by the disaster, by the event. And now we're into phase E. This is where we move forward with the EOC activation level. The EOC is definitely activated at this stage. We make we basically now start to buckle down, and we ensure that everything that has to be done is already done, and whatever has to be done or whatever is still pending based on the priority, it may have to wait until after. So I just want to move along. Phase E continued. Again, this is pretty standard in terms of our operations and how we prepare. And this could be tweaked to your organization in terms of how you would prepare for the event or for pre an event. I would get a little bit more into detail in that later on, but this is just generally to give you an idea of how disaster management units treat with events from 4 to 5 days out to just before the event. So I now just want to jump quickly into the business continuity aspect of it, where business continuity is really about, and I'm sure many of you will be aware, is about having a plan to deal with difficult situations beyond just severe weather impacts. It's about having how your organization can continue to function with as little disruption as possible. It's almost impossible to avoid completely disruption, but it doesn't mean that you can't try to manage it so that the impact is as minimal as possible. So that's where I came about pre-disaster recovery planning. Generally, recovery planning doesn't focus on the after. So pre-disaster recovery planning has a component where you set up a standing technical team. And this standing technical team meets very frequently, monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, and they continuously review and do tabletops and different types of exercises so that, and this standing technical team is usually people who are from your ESFs, so that when something does occur, instead of the typical time frame, and this was something that was developed by FEMA, instead of the typical time frame for recovery being anywhere from post-event up to 9 to 12 months. It's now been reduced considerably because everybody was already on the same page. Everybody already knew what needed to take place. So from 9 to 12 months, it would have been reduced to something like 3 to 6 months. And in a business, time is money. In a business, understanding that the faster you can get up and faster you can move forward is better for your business, is better for your community, it's better for your organization. So these are just some quick points in terms of the business continuity cycle. And again, this is in the context of what I'm familiar with. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with a different type of model, but this is what I was exposed to through my BCI training in terms of the model that is followed and the model that we as DMUs are now moving towards. So business continuity is something that we have always done as DMUs, but not necessarily followed in terms of our model. And this was training that I had before I joined the DMU. And it's something that I'm now, we're now pushing and integrating and merging, because a lot of what we do fits into both the disaster cycle and this business continuity life cycle. So it's just quick. Policy and program is your overall structure framework. The first stage would be embedding, where even though it's at the core, it integrates your business continuity into usual common day activities. You then move into analysis, which is a technique or the basic technique to do your risk assessments undertaken, to do your risk assessments, your business impact analysis. So as I mentioned, it's a cycle. So from that analysis of your business design, of your business impact analysis, and I mean, this business impact analysis is something that could be specific to your organization. It's just that it's advocated that it adheres to an ISO standard. It then moves into the design, which is where consideration should be focused on organization-wide approaches and not just tier level approaches, strategic, tactical, operational. And the design phase provides examples for the types of resources required and a range of well-established business continuity solutions. So the design basically allows for you to now flesh out, based on your impact analysis, what could we do? How could we respond? How do we prepare? What resources do we need to prepare? And you could do the same 4 days, 5 days out, 3 days out, 2 days out. Or you could just recognize that based on your capacity, you don't have those resources, which is a reality. And I mean, being honest with yourself as an individual and as a company, as an organization, is very important to how you treat with your reality. So from the design, your analysis, your design, you have your solutions, you now begin to implement. And this is where you detail your priorities, your procedures, your responsibilities, and you start to now test things. And implementation and validation could seem to have some sort of overlap. Oh, sorry. Oh. Right. And validation is really where you, but it's different. Whereby validation is coming back to your embedding and basically measuring what your intentions were to what your actual achievements are. So that's it in terms of business continuity. And I hope that I put it into some kind of context in terms of severe weather planning. And this is where I go a little bit further into severe weather planning or hazard planning. I made it a little different beyond just the severe weather planning. And I just focused, I know I mentioned here, hazard planning and business continuity. It's because once you prepare for any hazard, you would be prepared, or you would most likely be prepared for a severe weather impact. So severe weather impacts can and cannot impact you. It's very important that in your impact analysis, your business impact analysis or your environment impact analysis, you understand where you stand, what is your position in relation to the event. If it is that you're in a secure location, let's assume that you're in a mall, there's no flooding, it's unlikely you're going to, and you're on the ground floor, but you're not going to be impacted by flooding. You're not going to be impacted by a blown roof, but it's it's possible and likely that you may be impacted by a power shortage or power outage. Then you consider those factors and you realize that it may not be necessary to buy sandbags or to invest in sand and sandbags, but it may be better to have a backup data. So this is where I come to the business continuity aspect. Sorry, you jumped ahead a little bit. That I mentioned here because I'm not sure the audience and what exactly the organizations are representing or participating in this discussion. But if it is that we look at pre-COVID, we didn't have issues in terms of COVID-19 and the challenges posed to COVID-19 in terms of logistics and supply chain. But even if you look at beyond logistics and supply chain and you look at the impact that it's had on customers and organizations and how organizations operate, and you've heard a lot of narrative in terms of, well, you need to pivot and you need to adapt and you need to be innovative. Then the reality is that once you can do all those things, then you should be able to, in the context of preparation, then you would be able to adapt and you would be able to respond and prepare to any severe weather event or natural hazard impact. So companies and businesses as HSE advisors, there are a lot of things that can be done. Do up your SLAs, do up your service level agreements with other companies, with NGOs, with civil society, so that when something happens, you don't have to weather the storm alone. Have a plan, have emergency operation plans. I mean, I don't want to get this kind of touches on my recommendations at the end or coming down to the end, but it's just understanding that we need to diversify our portfolios and we need to understand that we have to treat things differently. So explore your options. As I move forward into my recommendations now, being that create an emergency operations plan. If you don't already have one, great. If you have one, test it. Additionally, in your emergency operations plan and you don't know, let's just say you don't know how to do it, reach out to me. Feel free, I would be more than happy to assist you in preparing an emergency operations plan specific to your organization. That's why the DMUs and the other entities are here. We're here to support. We're here to help coordinate. If it is that you have an emergency operations plan and you think it may be outdated, then we'll work with you to help update it. If it is that you don't have a component or you think that maybe it just needs to be reviewed, it was recently done, but having an external party just review it to give their input and see how it could be strengthened and improved, fantastic. There are resources available to you. If it is that something were to happen to your business, you have to consider things in terms of your EOP. What do you do? What do you do in the days ahead? What do you do in the days and hours after that follow? How do you treat with your staff? A critical component here, and it kind of touches on the key takeaways, but I will leave that for the key takeaways. Another quick recommendation is having backup data. We never know how things could go with technology. And I could draw on a very real example for the disaster management unit. About 2 years ago, unfortunately, our PC crashed and wasn't connected to the server. And that's not to mention the fact that last year, the servers for the Port of Spain Corporation crashed. Actually, they didn't crash. They were attacked by ransomware and we lost all our data. And if we didn't pay, we would have lost the data. We didn't pay. Because that's a government policy. So it's just to say that backing up data is not just specific to severe weather planning or natural hazard planning. It should be a part of your business continuity model so that you constantly have that support. You constantly have something to fall back on. You have that reliability that system that provides you with a degree of protection. Where possible, if you don't already have it, get insurance. Understand the context in which you operate, and if it is that you are in an area, or you're operating a business, or your company or your organization is in an area that is prone to flooding, then it may be worthwhile to consider getting insurance to cover at least your damages to your goods, to your items. Explore the options that are available to you in terms of insurance, in terms of protecting your business, in terms of workman's compensation. Maintain communication with your employees and your clients, because it's always important. As I mentioned before, that was something that is critical throughout the entire disaster management cycle, and in terms of your preparation throughout and response and recovery. You have to communicate. Keep the lines of communication open and be transparent. And the last one, which is one I particularly like, and it provides a segue into the last slide, is to rebuild your community, rebuild your staff, because after an event, you need your customers, you need people to be able to continue to support you. Businesses that are impacted, and this is looking at, there are a lot of references that could be made to Puerto Rico and Dominica and the significance of having these things in place. But most importantly, if you don't have your customer support backing you, and there's that symbiotic relationship between you and your customer support, or you and your customer base, then things aren't going to move forward as quickly as you hope. Things aren't going to recover, and the organization and individuals will not be as resilient as you think they are, or as they should be. Resilience is only dependent on the relationships that you have with people or with organizations, and how you can help each other move forward, rebuild. Resilience, remember, is getting back to a point where pre-disaster, or even better than before that. So what I would like for you to take away from this entire presentation and discussion is that you should have deep relationships with people. And this is a point where it moves beyond just your workplace, and it moves into having personal relationships with people.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
No, she coming to find out what I'm doing if I'm coming back for them.
Sheena, mute your mic.
Thanks, Sheena. So there's strength in communication and relationships. Explore the free training opportunities that are available. As I'd mentioned, SHIRT and shelter management training with Ministry of Rural Development and local government. If it is that you know individuals who may not have sound structures and sound homes, there is Habitat for Humanity, who provides PASA training, participatory approach to safe shelters, so that plenty of people, or there are many people who don't have proper structures for homes. And the reason I'm saying this is because you can't expect, or it's difficult for an organization to expect after an event that people can come out knowing that my house, my roof was just blown off, or I have no home because the entire thing was just demolished by either heavy rains or a landslide. And you have, I think, a responsibility as employers, the opportunity to provide information. I'm not saying, and I'm not an advocate for handouts, but if you have information, share the information. Share the information on how to build a safe home, how to provide safe shelter, how you can access grants, what grants can you access? And this is all information that is available to the public through self-help, through social development, through HDC, through even the DMUs. Understanding that you have to administrate, and this is something that I learned in my Army career, administrate before, the saying is administrate before you discipline, but there's no disciplining here. It's really just administrating, building those relationships so that you understand people beyond just the work context, and you understand how you can help them be resilient so that they can be resilient. Do they have grab and go bags? Does the organization advocate grab and go bags? Do you all have update first aid kits? If it is that something were to happen in terms of either hazard planning or severe weather planning, and people had to come back out, or something were to occur with fire extinguishers, let's assume that we're looking at maybe a forest fire or fire. Are people trained to use to use fire extinguishers? Are the fire extinguishers serviced? So you don't, what I'm saying is you don't want vulnerable people to become doubly vulnerable, which makes it even more difficult for them to be resilient, and by extension, the organization to be resilient. So community resilience, infrastructure resilience, and organizational resilience are all closely linked. And coming back to it, it's very close to the second point, to the first point, sorry, where understand the importance of corporate social responsibility, even though you may be a small organization, but treat it like an investment that will earn rewards in the future. Because by building individuals and resilient communities, you help businesses stay afloat. You help even your businesses stay afloat and to give your business a fighting chance. Work with your staff to develop plans, to develop your emergency operation plan, your crisis communications plan, so that you can move forward together. And lastly, diversify your portfolios. Recognize that in terms of severe weather planning, you yourself could be impacted to the point where your suppliers aren't able to provide you with the goods because ships can't come into the port. And that's how far you have to think. You have to think of how your entire supply chain going up and coming down, and explore the options available to expand your customer base. And one of the things that, even though I'm not a fan of the word pivot in the context of COVID, I am amazed to see how companies and businesses have adapted their business models so that they've expanded their customer base. A simple thing as how some hardwares have been able to stay open during COVID because they changed their business model to include a grocery. There may be some principled or other type perspectives on it or opposition to it, but it's just to say that they planned, hardware's planned. It may not have been anticipated, but they realized that there was a quick need to adapt. And it's in making those quick decisions that you were able to keep your business afloat, to maintain that business continuity, expand your customer profile, expand your customer base, and still keep lives and livelihoods, which I think is essential, lives and livelihoods afloat. So that brings me to the end of my presentation discussion. I would love to field any questions that you have for me.
All right. Rishi, you're saying something?
Yeah, we have one question in the chat here from a participant, and I'll read it out to you. It says, a lot of NGOs have attended CERT and shelter management trainings and are considering sending their members to be trained as volunteers. Who then do these volunteers report to? The NGO's response team or the DMUs in their municipality? Can NGOs use this training for a response independent of DMUs and ESFs?
The answer to that is yes. Individuals CERT trained. So the intention of CERT training is really to build individual resilience nationwide. Because in an event, the NGO or post-event, the NGO isn't immediately there. The DMU is not immediately there, even though we are considered as first responders. The actual first responder is your neighbor. So the CERT training is an individual type training that extends to an organization and extends to a group, in this case, an NGO or the DMU. So if it is that the NGO calls out their CERT volunteers, then in that case, they will be reporting to the NGO. But it doesn't mean that the CERT volunteer can't respond to an event. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thanks.
Does anyone on the meeting have any questions? You all can unmute and go ahead. Stefan, earlier you spoke about just a question from myself. You spoke about, if people have their, severe weather plans in place within their organizations, and they want to have someone look at it, someone with more skills in that area. We can approach you all. How do we formally do that if we wanted to get that guidance?
If you want to formally do it, you can do it through our CEOs. The CEOs differ for each regional corporation, or you could just send it to the disaster management coordinator.
Okay. And you
So
just
I know you could send it to myself or Hazan, and we'd be more than willing to assist.
And the contact information, can you just share what website we'll get that information on?
In terms of which contract, you'll
Yeah,
have to check the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government website.
Sorry?
But Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government.
Okay.
But if it is that you would like to share my contact phone number and email with the participants or the membership, feel free. That's fine with me.
Okay, noted. Any other questions? Just one more thing as well too, when you were speaking, Stefan, so what we're saying is that, these plans, these types of responses, we want people to sort of, take the information and apply it to their workspace. And a lot of times, people, they really plan for the response at home, right? In terms of, their own homes, their roof and that kind of thing. What are some of the things that you think businesses really ignore? I mean, I know you spoke about backing up of data and so on, but in terms of, do you think people really, businesses, do they really address the risk for flooding and that kind of thing in Trinidad?
I have seen it. I can't say that I have seen it across municipalities. Yes. We have noticed organizations sandbagging, especially those that in flood-prone areas. In some instances, whenever they expect high wind events, I have seen as well people either putting up the grills, the grills that they tend to use for carnival.
Right, yeah.
Or maybe even just simple things like tarpaulin. And that's a good point that you're mentioning, because you also need to factor that in during your planning, that if we're looking at a hurricane approaching Trinidad, there is most likely going to be a shortage of plyboard and material so that you could protect your windows or your glass doors, things like that. So you have to put things in place, have some kind of idea of, even if it's an arrangement with the hardware, it's like, hey, here, what? I need 2 sheets of this. So that's where I maintain that you need to have that relationship with your business and your community, so that you could reach out to people. It might just be as simple as, hey, I have a friend who have a hardware, so just hold 2 sheets of ply from her. Something as simple as that. But it's just knowing what you need to do, because you don't want an event to happen and then you realize your windows are broken, your place got looted, and you're in a worse position when it would have just taken 2 sheets of ply on a phone call.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think as weather patterns change, as severe events, weather events get more severe, we can definitely take, that timeline that you shared, because, the Met Office is pretty good about, sharing information ahead of time. Using your timeline to sort of model something for our own organizations. What do we need to do, 100 hours out, 48 hours out? Simple things like, do we need to, shut down a project, but if we are shutting down a project, what do we have to do? Do we have to pack away equipment? Do we have to bring down cranes? Do we, what do we have to do in that kind of phase response? Because as you said, that phase response is really, what you all do, but it's a good guide that you could then take to model something for your organization. So you really have to take a hard look at everything that your organization is doing. And as you mentioned, even like your supply chains and so on, and step by step, what do you need to do? One of the really important things that you mentioned is that in mapping out that response, we really have to look and really take an honest look at what resources are available to us, because that's really what's going to create a realistic plan for us, right? So I mean, simple as okay, where can we acquire sandbags from? If we have a hurricane coming, can we afford to put grills, or do we have to go simple as plyboard? Simple things like that. We have to think about ahead of time, as you mentioned, not just like when hurricane season start, but months before, planning that out. And I think, by planning ahead like that, where we can see that we have resource gaps, where we really don't have that money in the organization to do something, maybe given the time ahead, we can see, if there's something else we can put in place. So maybe if we can source it from another place, or maybe if we can acquire funding another way. But, in planning ahead, we can really see if there are any resource gaps we need to close that will prevent these events from really having a disastrous effect on the organization and by extension the employees, because of course we all have a stake in this response, this planning and response, because if our organizations are so severely affected, of course that's going to then affect us as employees as well, right? So it all goes in a circle.
Even even
Sorry, go ahead.
Shazar, if you look at there are a lot of options out there in terms of implementing solutions. So for Port of Spain, we have a very frequent issue, particularly East Port of Spain, with landslips. And it's because of how the developments have been. And it's house upon house upon house with no retaining wall, no proper infrastructure, no pilings. And retaining walls are expensive solutions. So what we've actually started exploring is the possibility of using something like Vetiver and the Vetiver TT and IAM movement provide Vetiver solutions as a possible replacement in some cases, or most cases, for retaining walls. It's a plant. It provides it's a more than just a plant, because it provides you with essential oils. The product, it basically has its own type of business attached to it. And there's a business model that they share and they train you in. So it's just to say that, yes, you have to explore your options and you have to plan and prepare, so that it's in planning and preparation, you realize what your limitations are, what your capabilities are. It's kind of like looking at your strengths, your SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, things along those lines. But going beyond that and saying, how do I treat with those things? How do I resolve these issues? And what are the partnerships available? And these partnerships only, you only realize the partnerships that are available when it is that you engage in discussions. Talk to people, talk to other HSE practitioners. I'm glad that you engaged Hazan and myself, so that we could provide solutions. It's only when you realize that your network provides solutions, that 7 degrees of connection kind of thing. But this is not just about people, this is about solutions.
Yeah, I think we have another question there, Rishi, if you could share it with us.
Sure, we have a question, and 2 people raised their hands earlier. So let me deal with this question here. With respect to flooding, what method of mitigation do you foresee in the future, or do we have to plan after the fact?
That's a question that really should fall on the Ministry of Works.
Right.
Because there are 2 sets of infrastructure that work together: Ministry of Works infrastructure and their massive drain systems. And then there's the planning division of the regional corporations. So the smaller drains feed into the bigger drains, and the bigger drains help pull the water away. There are multiple issues that it relates to flooding, unpredictable rainfall, poor drainage channels, people building in flood-prone areas, people building in mangrove areas, people building on inconsiderate building on riverbeds, or riverbanks.
Right.
There are a multitude of factors impacting flooding. So it's not that simple to see that there's a solution of bigger drains. You may have bigger drains, but the water could be redirected to another place, or there could be rainfall in another area that impacts an unexpected area. So let me just reference Port of Spain. Port of Spain rain really doesn't stay within Port of Spain, nor does it really originate from Port of Spain. Port of Spain's rain and flooding and landslide issues is really because of the flood, because of the mountain range that surrounds Port of Spain, which is Diego Martins, which fall within Diego Martin and San Juan Lavantil. And it's that terrain that really causes a lot of the flooding, not to mention the fact that Port of Spain has very aged infrastructure and inadequate infrastructure for what currently exists. So 50 years ago, we would not have found that flooding. But the more that they expanded the concrete and reduced the ability for water retention, then it meant that flooding continuously and gradually increased.
Right. We have a hand raised from Francesca. I don't know if Francesca, you want to unmute your mic and ask a question.
Hi, good night, everyone. I don't really want to ask a question. I just want to make a comment with regards to the business planning. I belong to Essential Service, right? Unfortunately, I cannot name the company. And what we do is that we have a disaster preparedness plan, and at the beginning of every year, we review it and we take into consideration what we need, both for employees that have to respond and also in case any employees get stuck on the compound. So we would look at whatever our essentials are. So you're looking at from if electricity goes, so you'll need lamps, batteries, and so forth. Whatever it is that you need to board up to secure the compound, whether it is that we need a portable generator and so forth. And we actually have a designated area, designated room to store these items. So we have things such as like chainsaws and so forth because of the utility that I belong to. And at the beginning of the year, you need to make sure all of these things are working. So even before the hurricane season starts, and as the hurricane season approaches, or we hear of some sort of adverse weather condition, there are some things that we will start activating should it come into play. Part of the plan is ensuring that we are aware of, so I would contact the corporations that fall within my district and find out where the shelters. This information is also shared with employees because you never know if an employee could be affected and they have to go to a shelter. Where is the nearest health center? So we have like the numbers, the fire services, where they're located, and all of these different things. So I just want to share that these are some of the things that companies could look at in putting together. You may not be able to get everything one time, but little by little, you can put together these things at the beginning of the year and share this information with your employees. And so they will understand. We share, what are the different levels. So what do you mean by when you have a tropical storm or hurricane? What is it, what you need to do within 24 hours, what you need to do within 48 hours, what you need to do within 72 hours, and so forth. So I just wanted to share that information.
Thank you very much for that, Francesco.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think she also made a good point there in terms of you may not be able to get everything together that you need for your ultimate preparation package, right? Because sometimes as practitioners, when we go to our bosses, management, they will just hit us with, well, we don't have money for all of that. We don't have money for this because that's probably not going to happen. But we as practitioners, we have to really present to them the whole cost benefit thing with respect to risk. So even if we could start with the things that are probably most important when we look at our risk assessment with respect to severe weather, and as she said, you work from there. You kind of start with the most important things, and then of course you can get the nice to have items. Well, I know it's just about almost 7:15. So I know I don't want to keep you all longer than you need to. Any other questions we have for Stefan before we close? All right. To the speakers, I really want to say a sincere thanks on behalf of the branch. We really appreciate the time that you all took. Even when I spoke to Paul up to yesterday from Met Office, they were quite busy with some of the weather systems in the area, and of course with issuing the various warnings, and then they had to change a few of them as well. And of course, Stefan, with you, I know this is in the heart of the season right now. So you and your team are very busy. So I wanna say thank you, for sharing with us the information, sharing with us, how you all do your planning as well, and really translating that into, how could we come up with a similar plan? Because we shouldn't just as organizations be responding to a severe weather event when it's just like we already at an orange level. We need to think about this from way before. And you also mentioned that it's not just about prepping the organization, but also prepping the employees, because of course without the employees being in a good state, the organization of course would not be able to function. All right. So thank you so much for your time and the information being shared. um yeah, any last remarks from anybody before we close? All right, so I think silence means consent to go. Stefan?
Shazar, yeah, I just posted in the chat my email address and my contact number.